Well, it is my honor to get to introduce our afternoon speaker, but before I do, I want to do a little bit of bragging. I'm Lisa Middleton. I'm the newest member of the CalPERS Board of Directors. I represent the over 500 cities that contract with CalPERS for our employees. But in joining the CalPERS Board, I get to join my first board of directors with women in the majority. I get to join my first board with an African American as president of our board of directors for the first time. On the CalPERS board, I get to be the first out LGBTQ person in our history. And I'm welcomed by a CIO, Ben Ming, who is our first Asian American CIO. And poor Marcy Frost is nothing more than the second woman to lead our organization. But far more than that. My day job is to be on the City Council in Palm Springs, California, a city that came out of the recession roaring. In the last 10 years, we have more than 2.5 times increased the revenue in our city. We're expanding hotels, building new restaurants. We own the millennials in our region. And how did we do that? We became a city that was nationally known for our inclusion and our diversity. It was good business in Palm Springs. It will be good business to you. I tell people constantly, diversity and inclusion is not simply the right thing to do. It is the best economic decision that you can make. It's my honor to introduce Brickson Diamond to kick off our afternoon with his presentation about successfully increasing diversity. Through his work with Big Answers, LLC, Brickson has been leading the change to make connections and create opportunities for those who don't have access to multiple industries. It's a lifelong pursuit that started as a young man, passionate about storytelling, through film and through impact stories that can have positive social change. From the time of his first Sundance Film Festival in 2005, Brickson noticed there was something missing from film by Black artists. That led to the creation of the Black House Foundation, which started out to provide opportunities to independent Black filmmakers and content creators. Today, Black House has become an agent of change in the entertainment industry, helping to facilitate the growth of films by Black artists from 7 in 2005 to 39 in 2018. More importantly, the Black House Foundation has played a role in developing business opportunities behind the scenes of entertainment to own, produce, and serve in the leadership roles that help create new opportunities. Brickson knows something about bringing people together and building coalitions. Through his work with the Executive Leadership Council, the global membership of Black business leaders, CEOs, and senior executives have doubled. All of this on top of his 15-year career with Capital Group companies, where he built a $1.2 billion practice supporting investment management consultants serving high net worth and institutional clients. We are so fortunate to have Brickson with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Brickson Diamond.
So who's seen a movie this year? Anybody? I need more hands because we need you to carry this industry. As Lisa said, I'm a bit of an escapee from the investment business. And I have a confession to make that escape was really all about cocktail parties. So I, unlike you, was not able to make yield curves, beige books, and Sharpe ratios interesting in Los Angeles cocktail parties. People would just walk away from me and blame me for not being more interesting. So I had to find my way in the entertainment business. And so this really is about, for me, is about being more interesting at cocktails. But what I'm going to do today is talk about the power of storytelling in diversity, equity, inclusion, and how we can transform the landscape in our organizations in thinking about these challenging issues that we've so artfully heard about already today. But what we're going to do is three things. Talk about my stumble into the entertainment business, think about spreading diversity into other industries, and then bringing it home with some explicit lessons through which I'll boil it down to a very simple formula for you to take back to your organizations. We ready to go? Yes. All right, you all got to speak up. Come on. Yeah, there we are. All right, first up, stumbling entertainment. And this is a part of the model, sort of a little preview here if you're keeping notes. Rich spaces are the best places to start, and thinking about places where there are opportunities. And as Lisa said, for me, that was Sundance. In 2005, I went with some business school classmates to the Sundance Film Festival. The secret is Sundance is in this mining town in Utah. And so if you go to see a movie that's an important thing that's going to be incredible and impactful, you're probably seeing it in a high school gymnasium. But in fact, the biggest venue they have is a high school auditorium. So think about that in terms of the starting place and the small little kernel that grows into so much more. But then what you think about is, what do you see when you get to Park City? This is a landscape of Park City. And what do you notice? Snow. But the sort of white expanse of Park City and Sundance is not just snow. You look around and it looks very much like this in every single way in 2005. So thinking about this rich landscape where incredible things happen, many missing players, you're like, what's happening here in 2005? And what I said was in 2005, I went there with some classmates from business school, saw an incredible movie where the producer at Second mortgaged her house to pay for the finishing funds. The cast had never seen the movie before. They cried. People ran up and down the aisles offering the director money before the credits roll. It sold for a record amount of money. They got 3 Oscar nominations. They won an Oscar for Best Song that next year. The song, get ready for it, was It's Hard Out Here for a Pimp by 3 6 Mafia. So I went back the next year in 2006, same level of opportunity, the same landscape, no different. And finally, I was able to put it to words then. What I had seen and experienced, and what I said was, where are the Black people? There was just nobody that looked like me anywhere in the streets of Sundance, and even less so on the screens. But what was great was there was a model that worked. If you spent time in the Queer Lounge, it was a space for LGBT filmmakers and their audiences. And they had cocktails, which was very important, but they also had education to help people understand what were the pathways into the Sundance ecosystem. How do you get into this place? How do you create content that's going to capture the imaginations of programmers, audiences, distributors, and then hopefully the award givers that are the establishment? And so with that magical combination, I was able to come back to Sundance and think about, how do you take rich spaces, missing players, and a model that works, and replicate it in a way that's going to get you success and more Black people in the streets and on the screens of Sundance. That was Black House. So Black House started in 2006 with this very clear mission. Let's figure out a way to create an access point to this incredible opportunity for so many people who look like us. Because there is an opportunity to not just sell your film for a record amount of money, but also to win an Academy Award. That's not a bad deal, right? And so if you think about the careers of Terrence Howard, Taraji P. Henson, and 3 6 Mafia, that's where they started. And Black House was intentional about creating broader spaces for other people like them in this landscape. So you got the formula now, right? It's take a rich space, figure out the missing players, and just shamefully copy a model that works. And that's what we did. So Black House created a rich space in Park City. If you're thinking about Park City, there are only 2 or 3 ways into the main strip, Main Street. And this one is on Main Street. If you make the corner off of Park onto Heber that crosses you into the madness of Sundance, we found the biggest yellow house and put a gigantic sign with Black House on the outside of it. And then we found missing players and brought them into the room. We had the great fortune of hearing from one of the co-founders of BET, but one of our first sponsors and supporters was the other co-founder of BET, who walked into Black House and said, "Oh, Black House, you mean Black people?" And that's what we brought. You'll see there's Diddy here, there's Bob Johnson, there's Tracy Edmonds. We had a whole host of folks because literally, if you build it, they will come. Creating that space to say this is an entry point for you was transformational for the Sundance landscape. We had panels, we had lots of pizza, we had lots of coffee. And remember, this is 2007, so we had computer terminals so people could check their email. If you are terribly young, you don't know what that's about. You literally have to line up and wait to sit down to check your email. If you're on the more mature side, you would think, what was email at that time? But that's another story. So it was an incredible success, right? No, 7 is an incredible success, but just 7 Black films in the festival out of 120. We had a lot of work to do. So we were at Sundance Film Festival, but we also ended up spreading to the Tribeca Film Festival, to the Cannes Film Festival, to the LA Film Festival, it's now gone away, to the Toronto International Film Festival, and to the American Film Institute Festival in LA. So at our peak, we were programming across all these festivals, all volunteer-led, all sponsor-driven, but repeating that model that worked in a way that would help us to connect audiences and connect filmmakers into a space where this rare thing happened. You would ask your mama, you'd ask your neighbors to help you make this movie, this great story, and you would submit it, it'd be chosen, someone would buy it, and then more and more audiences would see it. And the theory of change there was that if we change the image on the screen, we could change the perception of people in America, right? And so we were very excited about spreading this gospel and this methodology across the landscape. So what were the results? We got Oprah, y'all. In 2019, the Oprah Winfrey Network was the presenting sponsor for the Black House Foundation. And Oprah's plan was to bring her new show, David Makes Man, which airs on OWN this season, to Sundance to exhibit what they'd done and what the power was of what she was doing with Terrell McCraney. If you watched the Tonys, anybody watched the Tonys this past Sunday? Terrell McCraney was there talking about his play, Choir Boy, which was nominated for Tonys. So she brought Terrell, she brought Michael B. Jordan from Black Panther, and she brought Felicia Rashad. Unfortunately, Oprah got ill that day, and I had to fill in for her to do the panel. So basically, you all are getting Oprah today. I've been her proxy. You can go home and say, Oprah proxy, presented today at the Diversity Forum. CalPERS and CalSTRS are amazing. They are amazing, but add that to your description. So we got Oprah, and we got that engagement, and that was a huge expansion for us. We're sincerely hoping what Oprah has done for publishing, she'll do for Black House, but that's another conversation. This is the result. And so Lisa talked about it a bit. But in 2007, there were only 7 Black films in the festival, really thinking about how do you drive knowledge and education? How do you make connections with the people that matter, right? So in our first year at Sundance, John Cooper, who is the programmer, head of programming, would say that he would come and sit at Black House because it was the environment that felt most like Robert Redford intended when he created Sundance. It's gotten to be very commercial, very party-driven, very brand-driven. But for us, we're about community, bringing folks into our broad tent, helping them understand what was out there. How do you manage this space? What is the aesthetic? What does a Sundance film look like? What does it look like? A simple thing of you making your first short film, right? And you want it to be as long as it can be because you really don't want to make a short, you want to make a feature, but you ran out of money. But the reality is, no one can program a 20-minute short into a film festival because it needs to go with other shorts. So giving them that secret sauce of you need to be around 5 to 7 minutes so you can be programmed in is a powerful leap. There are other stories. There's a film that comes to the festival in 2008, our second year there. It's called Pariah. It's directed by a woman named Dee Reese. You may recognize Dee's name because she was nominated for an Academy Award for Mudbound in the last couple of years. But Dee came to Sundance with a short, 2008. She went out, she used the resources, the education. She came back with Pariah as a feature in 2011. Back in those days, the gap between your creation of the first film and your next film could be very broad for women and people of color. We're very happy it's shortened. Someone like a John Ridley comes in, does 12 Years a Slave, goes on to be a very successful film, to win an Academy Award, and he goes right out of that into television, right? And he does the American Crime series, and he wins acclaim and awards for that. But both those stories are cases where people have come in, understood the landscape, been able to have an entryway in, not just through our space at Black House, which is super Black, but also to figure out what on earth is happening on the outside. Who are the people I can connect with? How am I going to get people to buy my content? And it's been a really incredible experience for us to drive that. But beyond that, I've been spending my time post my career in the investment management business, which I left full-time in 2010, thinking about how do you spread this gospel, spread this methodology to other spaces. It's slow going in the asset management business, right? So even in my time in this space, I worked on a global recruiting program for training program for my firm, for the Capital Group. And so we were recruiting around the world and getting folks in. And today, I think like 3 of the 7 people on Capital's management committee came through this training program. So it really was a route in. But even still today, I think about where I sit on boards. I sit on a university board, a prep school board, a donor advised fund board. How do you bring in manager diversity? How do you have sincere conversations about alpha, about the opportunity that's created, that's going to drive the shift in our strategy and our portfolio is something I think about a lot. But I've also thought about other rich spaces. And thinking about the markets as a whole, there was a great opportunity for me to join an organization that I became a member of in 2004, the Executive Leadership Council. And there are a few folks in this room who are ELC members and connected, James Andrus, Erica Irish Brown, Sekou Kalin. One of our great friends is Art McLaren. We at ELC were thinking about the complete landscape of industry to understand how do you make change at the senior level around diversity. But we had to think a lot about inclusion as well, even in our organization. Sekou mentioned it. How do you think about inclusion when you're a team that's focused just on Black stuff? And that's been the case at Black House as well. We're not just Black people on the board, but we have people across perspectives. But ELC, I was chief operating officer from 2012 to 2017. In that space, we made a slight change that was pretty significant. We went from just defining as African American to Black, which gave us an opportunity to have a much more global perspective around what this leadership pipeline looked like and what leadership looked like in corporate enterprise. We also shifted from the Fortune 500 to the Fortune 1000 and Global 500. Because our thesis was, if we want to shift the reality of the top of the house across firms, we had to be able to get an earlier pipeline into leaders and understand how they came in and could be shaped and networked and connected in ways that would drive success for their careers. But additionally, our 3 levels from the reporting of the enterprise-wide CEO was important. But guess what? We hadn't included board members. So the people that CEOs reported to were not able to be members because we were so focused on the 3 down. And so we expanded our membership to include board members, and that was an important shift for us as an organization and an important drive. So how do you think about leadership in organizations? And how do you think about diversity? We've heard so many conversations in this morning about how board members can be leaders and how they can drive change and make requests and make particular asks and questions. In the same way that you as investment managers can ask the companies that you're going out to talk to, what does a team look like? All the things you've learned today, how is that being translated into the operations of the organization? And the thing that we learned is people who are bad listeners around diversity and inclusion are often bad listeners around a lot of areas, right? It's just, this is a very obvious pain point. The fact that you don't understand how to expand leave in a way that's constructive, those folks, especially in this current generation, are going to have much more resolve to get up and walk out. But in fact, the fathers in the room who've been struggling for years with the travel schedule that you put on them are also struggling. They've just been discouraged from speaking out. So thinking about that has been a really important lens of driving change and impact. We grew members, as Lisa said, from 400 to 800 in that time. So combing the country to really figure out where people were and identify them. And also lauding companies about the success they'd had in cultivating great talent. While at the same time understanding that the dynamic of work is changing so rapidly. What does success look like in 2019? Is quite frankly very different from what success looked like when I joined the firm and I joined ELC in 2004. So always keeping up with those challenges, you got to go back and reach for Black versus just African American, for Fortune 1000 versus just Fortune 500, for the board member who would have thought you were leaving them out in a way that gives you more perspective, and also for new leaders in new types of work and new industries that are going to drive is an important lesson for us. Big challenges require big answers. This is the commercial portion, wanton promotion here. My firm, Big Answers, really works across a number of areas: technology, across entertainment, across philanthropy, but also across asset management. I have a client now, we're working on finding more diverse investment counselors to work with high net worth families and individuals. It's a fascinating exercise to understand across 5 markets: Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, and Atlanta. Sort of what's driving wealth? How are they choosing to go forward in terms of how they allocate their money into advisors? And what we're learning very quickly is that there is, as we talked about in terms of women, as our keynote this morning talked about, this underserved market, right? And so when I think about, in the Bay Area, the Asian Pacific Islander community, and so a lot of folks are invested in tech, right? And so the common refrain is, all my savings and all my wealth are in my equity. Or even in the spaces where some of you all sit, in private equity or venture. All my investments, all my savings, all my wealth opportunities are in my carry, right? So we're trying to think about, how do you get someone to come in and help you think about diversifying your portfolio? Because we can be very guilty. The cobbler's child has no shoes can be a really clear dynamic. And so in communities where people are young and moving fast and building wealth, diversification is not something to think about. And you all have the tools, both for your investors, for the people who are beneficiaries of the plans that you run, but also the products that you create and the things that you sell to spread that to broader places in the market, and even the wealthy are underserved. And so we're trying to think about how to identify the circles of influence, the providers, and then those clients that we need to capture. And so that's one example of the kind of work we do, of not just finding the talent to help you find the market, because as we said, diversity is not just an imperative because it's nice to do. A few weeks ago, I was back at my college reunion, and a nod to sort of the importance of bringing in younger people. A woman from the class of 1994, celebrating her 25th reunion, was given an honorary degree. She's an expert on race from a psychology perspective, full professor at Yale, MacArthur Genius Fellow, a Guggenheim Fellow this year, and she talked about a lot of issues, but in core, she said, diversity should be important to you if you care about democracy. Because you cannot have a sustained democracy with as much wealth inequality as we have today. At some point, if you look across frontier markets, emerging markets, political uprisings rise out of conditions that are far less severe than the one we experience in the country today. So if you care about democracy, diversity has to be important to you. If you care about profits, you care about alpha, you care about mitigating risks, because you think about any number of companies out there who have taken the opportunity to seize new markets because they've captured diversity as a best practice. On the other side, you think of those who've just been obliterated because they haven't had the awareness that diversity brings. Not just someone at the table, but someone who's at the table who can say, we should not do this. This is a bad idea. The other space in philanthropy we talk about a lot is bringing in diverse people into your board. And what that means is, if you're bringing a diverse person on your board, is not having them sit on a folding chair, right? You got to give them the big, cushy leather chair to be involved and engaged and to have a full voice in the conversation. Because the diversity thing is really about these important lessons that I'm going to boil it down to right now. You've heard about the movies, you heard about the films, but the reality is, the statistics, the data is telling us something very explicit. And this comes back from 2011, reported in 2012, around the sort of split in births from majority to minority, right? The majority of births in the US were surpassing whites, minorities in 2011. That keeps going. These are a list of 13 states in the District of Columbia, where non-white births exceeded white births in 2017. And then finally, Brookings is driven forward with this research and this declaration that in 2045, and the date keeps moving for lots of reasons, the US will become a minority white. Stunning information, stunning data, stunning results, important because of the context and the texture of your clients, your constituents, and your workforce, right? If you want to find talent, this will be the talent pool you're pulling from. And your ability and your experience your expertise at recruiting and managing them will be critical, right? People will ask questions the way plans are asking now about the diversity in your leadership, the diversity of your workforce, and how you're moving folks forward. Again, it's about profits, about risk, it's about the right thing to do, but it's also about the sustaining of our democracy. Thinking about this, one of my colleagues back in my old days in institutional, I left the institutional business in 1997. I had a colleague who was very plain. And her mantra was, you show me how you pay me, you told me what you believe. Right? Incentives are important, and you communicate to your employees by the way you incent them. And so if this is important, you have to figure out ways to work it into that process. It's critically important. Because they would tell us all the time, we want you to do X, Y, and Z, and she would say, how are you paying me? You're paying me Y. Yes, I'm going to do Y. X, X and Z evidently aren't that important to you because you're not paying for it and you're not putting in the measures. So let's make it plain. Boil it on down. The investment business is an incredibly rich space. There are opportunities, responsibilities, and connections that are just world-changing in the work that you all do. But they're missing players. They're folks who are not here. Black House is a model that works. So we talked about 39 films in 2018. I'm incredibly proud of the partnership with Sundance because looking forward, in 2019, that number grew to 42 projects, films, episodic work, and virtual reality. And what's important in that is they really had to change with the times because Sundance was this sort of really highbrow film festival for so long. And if it wasn't film, they weren't interested. But they realized television had this renaissance and television had risen up. And so now they had to figure out a way to bring television into this ecosystem and to really understand how do you make change around what you're doing when you're fundamentally this one thing is really hard. But by making that change and diving in, you're really able to fundamentally keep up with the times and transform the conversation. And diversity helps you with that, right? If you look at the trends around what people are doing in terms of consumption around content, and let me give you this little tip, people of color over-index on the consumption of entertainment. It would then lead to reason that you need to figure out how to over-index in content that appeals to them. But if you're in a room, like we heard before, where everyone has the same backgrounds, has the same perspective, you might not just miss that data because it probably comes before you. You probably see it, but bias prevents you from digesting it and driving to action. So it's really important. So Storycap, recap of the story. Storytelling as a power in diversity, equity, inclusion. I stumbled in entertainment just to be interested at cocktail parties. But in reality, I was a storyteller all along. I was telling stories about the companies we invested in, our portfolio construction process, why we were an organization that could deliver you excess returns with reduced risk, really bringing to life our Sharpe ratio, right? That was where I started in my career. And I chose this business because coming out of college, I felt there were smart people doing interesting things with a pretty interesting revenue model. That didn't hurt. But really, it was a great place for storytelling in my life. And a space where I could bring the tradition, the African-American griot tradition, to bear in institutional hallways and in people's homes to help them reach the goals of their pension beneficiaries or their families. And storytelling then allowed me to go in, living in Hollywood, luckily, to find friends who were putting those stories on the big screen. And to think about how do you create more access for people to tell stories that not just resonated with people who look like them, but also open new pathways and new doors. Black House has partnered with organizations like Latino Real, which is an organization for Latino filmmakers to help them experience the rise in content that we did in the Sundance space. We partner with folks like Gold House, which is an organization of Asian American Pacific Islanders, largely investors and technology entrepreneurs who are funding things like Crazy Rich Asians. How many people saw Crazy Rich Asians? Just an incredibly fun ride, right? Which you would think was an obvious thing to do, but this took a long time to get to market. So working with people like Latino Real in those organizations and Gold House have been great ways for Black House to take the formula, rich space, missing pieces, a model that works, and drive change. You got to spread it in other industries. And the benefit of the work that you do is that you get to talk to people in other industries every day. Not just our little bubble of investment management and plan sponsors, but the companies that you deal with that are so close to opportunities that they could just make sure they have the people with a perspective, they could seize them. I work with a very nascent venture capital fund that I am an advisor to, Jump Cannon, out of the Bay Area. And they have this distance traveled thesis that says that the founder's distance traveled in terms of their life is an indicator of their ability long term. So if someone started out and they're first gen college educated, their parents are non-English speakers, they lived in really disadvantaged communities, the fact that they've gotten that college degree, built that network and built that company, that's a distance travel that exceeds most traditional founders. And once you give them that capital, their ability to travel distances is going to give you that same sort of distance and that same sort of lift in terms of their performance as a company. And so thinking about that to pursue unlikely founders is a great way to think about other industries and how to spread this wealth and how to spread the expansion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You got the lessons boiled down. Again, find a rich space where they're missing players and copy from us, right? You too can see the distance from 7 films in 2007 to 40 plus in 2019 and hopefully beyond. I mean, I think about a movie like The Black Panther. Who saw Black Panther? Black Panther, of course, starts as a story with Ryan Coogler, whose first movie, Fruitvale Station, about a shooting in his hometown, Oakland, at a local BART station, was his foray into this space, right? But he really incredibly had many more stories to tell. And he had them all ready to go because he was in this ecosystem. And Sundance brought him in and nurtured him and supported him and made introductions. And then he was able to bring forward this cartoon that had many other people who were interested in it, but in a way and with Disney backing to really drive it. What Black House looks to do now is to make sure that Ryan and the next Ryan can do that in a space where he has ownership, where he has more equity, where he is the Disney behind the operation. Those are incredible opportunities that need to be spread. And there's so many opportunities that all of us can spread and that we can engender to really make sure, again, that imperative of democracy is pursued and held up, but also that we benefit our beneficiaries in the plans, our investors, our clients, our constituents, and our employees in ways that not only lift them up and allow them to make their full contribution, but allow us to enjoy each and every one of them. Thank you very much.